Well, we can't have a Holy Humor Sunday episode of The Word Made Fresh without a couple Bible jokes. Bring your favorite joke book to church on Sunday because it's Holy Humor Sunday. It's going to be delightful in so many ways. But Reverend Thorne, you're not preaching. I'm not preaching. Who is our guest preacher this coming Sunday?
I don't know. Maybe it's the person that's here with us today. Friends, this is Reverend Ann Groom, and she's going to be bringing a delightful word for us on Sunday. Ann and I have known each other, oh my goodness, I don't know for how many years, but have followed each other. She has often served as at interim at churches that I'm in relationship with or churches that I'm heading to or have interviewed at. So I saw her recently preach a sermon and just thought this is the person we need to bring to Riverside for Holy Humor Sunday. So Ann, we're really excited and delighted to have you with us today and looking forward to having you with us on Sunday morning.
Thank you. My pleasure. I look forward to it. Though the idea of holy humor, that was a daunting vault for me to get over. I appreciate that I can be amusing and all, but when it's called humor, and that's another thing. But I think I've got it. Doing a little research on what Holy Humor Sunday started out as kind of helped me a little bit, you know.
Okay, pull that back for us a bit, because that's my first question that either of you can really touch on, but Ann, maybe you just mentioned you've been researching. What is Holy Humor Sunday? Besides who is Ann Groom, what is Holy Humor Sunday are probably the two biggest questions people are going to have for this video.
Well, from what I gather, at least the 15th century Bavaria, there was a tradition of having the Sunday after Easter called the Easter laugh or Humor Sunday, and priests would tell jokes. And one of the jokes, because I found a couple of the jokes. Have you heard any of their jokes? I mean, one of them was about how the devil was trying to keep the door shut so that Jesus couldn't descend into hell on Holy Saturday. That was a joke. And another joke, which I didn't find that amusing, was how the Trinity were arguing with each other who had to go down and be crucified. And that was a joke. And I guess the priests would act out things, and they even started like stimulating arguments between couples in the sanctuary to get people all excited and riled up. And anyway, it got very vulgar and out of hand. And I read one quote from a Protestant who said that, and this was from an Easter sermon, but I guess the humor was certainly part of Easter since it's the Easter laugh. He said that the sermon was so full of crude vulgarities that he could not, a man, he said, could not go to a dinner party and describe this sermon. So it got out of hand. The people got out of hand. It got really crude and rude. And at some point, some pope said, nope. And then I guess the Protestants also said, nope. And so, but here we are again. We're reclaiming it. I promise not to be crude. So,
at least not too crude.
Amy Schumer is one of my favorite funny ladies, and she's very crude, but I won't emulate her. No.
Well, I'm glad that we're bringing it back. I found out about it, Ann, from a friend of mine who I believe is Episcopalian, and they may lean into it a little more than the Protestant tradition, but I've also heard it called Bright Sunday. And so this notion of joy, this notion that Jesus has had the last laugh over death and the devil, as you said, trying to hold the door shut. It's like, come on, who do you think you're up against? This is Jesus, the Son of God. So an opportunity, I think, for us Christians who can be sort of staid and somber to laugh and to be delightful and joyous, I think is good for us, especially following Easter with spring coming. And we're going to have children in worship that Sunday, so we're doing all kinds of things to be amusing for them and with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it reminds me in the First Baptist Church where I grew up in a little town in Oklahoma, you know that song, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. We all know that song. One of the verses we sang was, and if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Sit on attack, sit on attack, and so on. And that stuck with me all my life. And I remember thinking, does a devil really sit on attack? But you see, there's a little remnant of what the early church fathers and mothers, perhaps too, saw as truly a theological truth that God played a joke on the devil.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it back to that. I love the historical context. Thank you for that.
So this Sunday we're in the book of Acts, which is a big shift for all of us narrative lectionary folk. We have been sprinting through Mark because Mark keeps you moving for quite some time up until Easter. We got a nice little Mark's resurrection glimpse, but now we are dipping our toe into Acts. So we are in Acts chapter 1, and the whole reading is, I think, verses 1 through 14, which covers a few sections. First, you get kind of the author Luke talking about my first book, which was the book of Luke, and now this is his second book. And then you get the ascension moment where the disciples are like, is this the time when you're going to restore the kingdom, Jesus? Finally, we're going to be in charge. And Jesus is like, you still don't get it? No. And then he ascends. I think you're going to touch on that in a minute, Jane Ann. And then there's this last bit where Matthias is chosen to replace Judas because Judas had his own narrative. That's a whole other story. So, Jane Ann, you are focusing on the ascension. Can you kind of guide us to where you are leaning with the sermon you're prepping?
I have been, I've noticed, tell me if I'm wrong, that many more liberal churches don't really preach much about the ascension, do they? Not in my experience.
Not in my experience. I was raised Catholic, so I am very steeped in the ascension, but I think you're right. I don't hear it talked about much.
It's not talked about, but at some point about over a dozen years ago, I began to always on Ascension Sunday, which again, this won't be Ascension Sunday, right? This is the Sunday after Easter, but I began to focus on the Ascension once a year, and I began to really, really feel blessed by the image. And of course, it's all very traumatic, as the whole Bible is so full of trauma. And I think we don't always focus on that. But I mean, even think of Easter morning. How traumatic would that be? I mean, we make it beautiful and sweet and pretty, but really just trauma. It makes me think maybe we talk so much about trauma these days, but maybe just life. It's just life, And so, so the Ascension is a time, the thing that blesses me so much is the fact that for me, it really fleshes out, quite literally, what I think God is like, and this beautiful, awesome, ineffable I am of the Hebrew Bible, of the Old Testament. That is God, of Jesus. That is the loving God, the merciful, gracious God. And yet there's a transcendence and a awesomeness there. And then, though, the idea, which I think John Calvin emphasized a lot and was really important, that Jesus, with his broken body, his wounded flesh, ascended, and the imagination of our tradition gives us this image of Jesus at the right hand of God. And to think, we can't really think about God. The minute we do, we've made God tiny and domesticated, and we don't have a mind for it. And though we can kind of think about Jesus and the ways that he healed people and touched people and loved the unlovable and embraced the unembraceable and, wrote doodles in the sand and pointed out some pretty important things, all those things, that person is at the right hand of God. And that makes God so present in a way. I mean, I could cry. It touches me that deeply. And the other piece, and of course, then we have the quirky left hand of God, the Holy Spirit. That's another story. But I love the Trinity. I know so many preachers I've heard say, "Oh, I don't know how to preach." But the Trinity is the most amazing way to talk about what we can't talk about, seems to me. But anyway, the other story that we never talk about, in my experience, is the descent of Jesus into hell. Now, Richard Rohr talks a lot about that these days, and but I've never heard that really talked about in church. Not too long ago, I actually referred to it in a church, and everybody was just, riveted. But the notion that this too is part of the imagination of our tradition. It's in the creeds, and it's the notion, the image of Jesus ascending, descending, but leaning into hell and lifting out those souls, those bodies incarcerated there. And I know our tradition, I think it's about, right, Adam and Eve and Moses and Solomon. There's a progression of who gets out, if you will, but in I think our expansive universal imagination, I can imagine that hell will be emptied. period. Hell will be emptied. And that too just makes me want to weep.
Yeah.
Yes. And it is sort of a last laugh as well, because I think the devil thinks he will be in business forever. And God is like, not with my people.
No, that's right.
Right?
Well, I mean, dare I tell this story? It's funny. I found this story many years ago and have told it many times. And I just recently saw it printed in the Plow, the Plow publication. And I'd never seen it written down before. But it's a story from the Middle Ages. It's about a man who's deep, deep, deep into a cavern, deep in the earth. And it's so slimy and dark and miserable and slime coming down. And he's stuck there and he can barely see a teeny bit of light at the top, barely see it. And he's trying to crawl out of this for hundreds, thousands of years he's trying. And sometimes he gets so far and he falls back. Do you know the story, by the way? No, okay. Anyway, he goes farther and further. And finally, he manages to crawl to the very top and pull himself out. And he finds himself in an upper room. And there's a table set with Jesus and the others. And Jesus turns to him and says, Judas, at last, now we may begin.
Wow.
That's grace,
gorgeous.
isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes.
So of course, Judas isn't the devil, though in some people's minds he kind of is. But anyway, I think there's just incredible grace in the stories of the ascension and the descent. And then, of course, the ascension, you've got all those people left behind. And I grew up Southern Baptist, and that series of books, the Left Behind series?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm one of those, and I'm not alone. It sounds kind of silly to people who've grown up in other kinds of traditions, but literally there were times when I would come home as a teenager and there wouldn't be anyone around, and I would literally wonder if I had been left behind.
You missed it, yeah.
That's tough, right?
Yeah.
But so that to be left behind is a thought that comes to my mind when I think of the stories, because these people, its followers, have been through so much and had their joys and then deflation and their own, their own failures and this and that. And then here, what? So that's kind of what I'm going with my sermon. But
that's
this really is a left behind moment. I mean, it's not the horrible theology of those books, but this is the disciples being left behind. They had anticipations, and every time they have expectations, they seem to be flipped. And once again, they expected something, and then, wait a minute, Jesus, you're leaving, you're vanishing, you're disappearing into this cloud of glory. What? Oh, that is such a framing of that experience.
Yes, yes. Which picks up on where we had gone for Easter, which is writing our own ending. We, the Gospel of Mark ends with that, and they left in fear and trembling and said nothing to anyone. But of course, we do get to write what's next. And I loved and appreciated what you said about putting flesh on this and the body and Jesus's body being sort of shredded. But it speaks to the incarnational, the embodiedness of our theology, and how that body of Jesus is not a perfect body. The body that sits at the right head is still a scarred, imperfect body, which I think is good news for us who are thinking about what next. It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't have to be perfection. And there's sort of a laugh on us as well in that, because all along the disciples are getting it wrong. And again, Jesus is saying, you're still not getting it. Grace is abundant and love is lavish. And the devil doesn't get my people. So we have to keep remembering and being reminded, I think, of this God, of who this God we serve really and truly is. Yeah.
I think that's right. Now that I've been going to church as opposed to standing up at the front, and I really love going to church.
Yes.
But I'm listening to sermons and with the question that I always had, like, what is the sermon for? What is it for? And I've decided maybe it is to be reminded. It's to be reminded of what we already hope for, perhaps, and know. It's not to be entertained, though I do hope I'm halfway entertaining. It's called Holy Humor Sunday. But it's not to be cleverly inspired, though that's great to learn. I like to learn something. It is, though, to just have one little thing that perhaps fills a heart You know, I always think of the people who come into a sanctuary with a diagnosis or some really new bad news or some great fear, you know? And so that's what the sermon's for, seems to me.
Yeah, no, I think you are spot on, and that's why I think you're the right person to be preaching this Sunday. I'm super excited for the message you're going to bring.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I will lean onto onto God, and give God the praise, and the blame too.
Look at that! You're so funny.
All things work for the good. I know people don't necessarily like that because it's not something you can go and tell someone who's been through hell that all things work for the good. But it may be one thing that one can begin to claim for oneself, to trust that, you know, to trust the God who is. And so that's what I think.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, we can't have a Holy Humor Sunday episode of The Word Made Fresh without a couple Bible jokes. So I've got a couple Bible jokes to see if you know the answers to them, just to get us, you know, keep the spirit going. So, okay, the first one. What kind of man was Boaz before he got married? Any idea? Ruthless.
Oh.
Okay. One more.
All right,
Equally cheesy. I'm like in my dad joke prime here. Okay, one more. Who is the smartest man in the Bible?
It's supposed to be Solomon, but I
Nope,
know that's not.
It's Abraham because he knew a lot. He knew a lot.
He knew
okay, that's a groan. Okay,
that's a groaner. Okay.
Don't use those jokes, Reverend Janie Ann. They obviously, that first one maybe, the second one no. We got to workshop it more. Everyone watching, listening, we got a lot of good stuff coming. As always, this coming Sunday, you will be delighted in so many ways. We are excited and anticipating, so bring all of your joyful energy. And I want more Bible jokes, so drop a comment below with your favorite Bible joke so we can all keep laughing in the comments, and the devil's never going to get the last laugh, not when we're talking. So, Jane Ann, thanks for hanging out with us and chatting and talking. It's going to be a delight to have you with us on Sunday. And Reverend Adriene, it's always good to see you. And I think we'll get you back in the pulpit the following week, right? Are you back in there then?
Yes, that's true. That is true. But I get to do the message for all ages. So I'll be preaching to the little ones and to all the ages. And I think there'll be a fun surprise in there as well.
Okay, so don't tell them my Abraham joke. It's not going to work with the kids.
They won't know what you're talking about.
Okay. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week. And until then, enjoy all this Bible goodness. We'll see you later.